If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray, and seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, and will forgive their sin, and will heal their land.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Hello, Christian Patriots, and welcome to Church and State, where we strive to plug you into the pew and plug you into politics. I'm your host, Caleb Collier. With me, as always, Pastor Gabe Blomgren.
Fighting the fight, the Black Road Regimen, we're here.
Amen to that, yes. All right, so I am very, very excited to introduce our guest here for the episode today. Now, Rosemary Gibson is a senior advisor at the Hastings Center and perspective editor at JAMA Internal Medicine. She is the author of China RX, Exposing the Risks of America's Dependence on China for Medicine. Now, this is a very important topic for Americans to understand because currently, as of this show, 90% of all medications are produced in China. And if you don't think that's dangerous, then you need to be shaken, seriously.
That is huge. I have parents who are on drugs that are life critical to them having a normal life. And in the event of any type of glut kind of stoppage on whether travel or electricity or, even riding, my parents are going to be needing to have a stockpile if that's the case.
Absolutely. All right. So with that, Rosemary, thank you so much for joining Church and State. We really appreciate it.
Oh, I really appreciate the chance to talk with you today and to be with your listeners and viewers because it's such an important topic that affects all of us.
Absolutely. Now, China RX came out in 2018, and then we also had the New American Magazine had the article on actually Constitution Day, September 2019. China making your medicine. So you've been at this for a few years now, but is the American public waking up to the dangers with this?
It's heartening to see that, yes, there are many people who are waking up to the fact of how dependent we are on China for so many of our medicines. And just to tweak something from the beginning, where we are dependent on China is on the core ingredients to make thousands of our medicines. And the world is dependent on a single country, namely China. And so since the New American article came out, we had this thing called a global pandemic. And we had 100 countries competing for the same source of these key materials to make the generic drugs that are needed to help people who are hospitalized with coronavirus and to help them recover. And this was all predicted in China RX, which came out in 2018. I wrote back then that in the event of a natural disaster or global pandemic, the United States will be waiting in line with other countries for essential drugs. And that's exactly what's been happening.
Exactly. They have us over a barrel, currently with President Trump when he's, basically kind of restricting their economy, through these tariffs and things that he's been able to implement. China can now push back and say, hey, if you want medications for your population, you better play ball with us.
And not only that we found out, Caleb, through this article that they were putting in foreign things like jet fuel in the medication. So that this is just no sort of quality control. So the level of trust that we have for our medications is it's very suspect.
It's a very serious problem. And these are issues that affect not just us here in the United States. You're right about the blood pressure medicines. There was a single company in China that made the key ingredient for blood pressure medicines that millions of Americans were taking, and also people in more than 20 other countries. And it had rocket fuel chemicals in it. And it was on the market for 4 years before anybody discovered it. So, and the attitude of the Chinese producers is one of the reasons our medicines are so cheap is because we assume no liability for them.
Wow.
This is horrible.
It's buyer beware. And it's regrettable that companies that buy them from China and sell them in the US are not taking care of us and looking out for the interests of Main Street America.
Now how many? Go ahead. Sorry.
No, and as far, just a quick thing on as far as the, potential for withholding medicines, it's important to recognize that more than 10 years ago, China threatened the United States with drug shortages if the federal government didn't do something that it wanted.
Wow. So they were
That was
already they were
yeah.
they were already threatening then.
And we should have paid
And
attention then.
exactly right. And back then there wasn't any trade kerfuffle. So,
Right.
as I testified before Congress, if you control medicines, you control the world.
Wow.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, how many people died from the rocket fuel that was put into this medication?
What makes these bad drugs so insidious is that it's very hard to show cause and effect. Now, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, says the risk of death is very small. But everybody's body's chemistry is different, and you might have different predispositions to cancer. So it's virtually impossible to show cause and effect. But the reality is this should never have happened. And it happened because big companies that were looking for the cheapest product. It's like if you and I went to the mall this weekend and we want to buy this cheapest possible t-shirt, well, we could find it. And after a couple washes in the washing machine, it'll fall apart and we'll go out and buy it again. Well, the reality is many people are treating our generic drugs like commodities, just like t-shirts, and we've got to really think about that differently.
Absolutely. Now, talk about the national security implications associated with this. If you're looking at not just the vast majority of Americans that are currently on some type of medication, this also applies to our military, obviously. And so you could end up with a number of, especially top brass, who would potentially not have medication, or even maybe their medication was poisoned intentionally.
Yeah, this assassination ready to go right there.
Oh, that's right. There is a chapter in China RX called "So Where Does the Secretary of Defense Procure His Medicines?" And that raises the national security implications. And think of it, you could put a lethal contaminant in a drug and send it to civilian and military hospitals. You could sell medicines that have no medicine in them. And for things like antibiotics, that would be devastating. It would allow infectious disease to spread unabated. So our medicines can be weaponized. And of course, you can withhold supplies, and that's what China has threatened to do. In fact, like 2 months ago, they threatened to withhold antibiotics from the United States. And I'm hearing that from very credible sources in industry and a former very senior level in the government that they're hearing that China is telling their companies not to sell materials to the U.S. To make antibiotics.
Wow. So they've already begun. They've pulled the trigger on this, as it were.
It seems so, very quietly, yes.
It's very unique also because a lot of our products, obviously, there's the manufacturer's origin. You can see right on there if it's made in Taiwan. But your medications, there's no way for you to know as the buyer. This is a whole new realm. How does a buyer able to even ask their doctor, where does my medical medications come from?
Well, doctors don't know, and there's no reason they should know. In China RX, I talk about legislation that was introduced more than a decade ago with country of origin labeling legislation. And the point was, I said, so why didn't it pass? And someone from the industry said that, well, it was killed right away. And I said, why? She said, well, the industry probably thought it wouldn't be good for their business if their customers knew where their products were coming from.
Yeah, you can't trust the consumer.
The bottom
basically,
line.
Yes. Yeah, so it's all for profit. Now, with 90% being made in China, where's the other 10% coming from? Is that from India, or is it?
Just to be clear, those are the core, the
yes,
chemicals.
the core, yes.
The ingredients. The others could come from a variety of countries. But China certainly has the dominant global chokehold on those raw materials and chemicals to make thousands of our generic drugs. And, even the medicines being used as new treatments for coronavirus, such as remdesivir. Well, guess what? Some of those components are sourced in China. So this affects, the branded, patented products as well. Yeah. It's a very, very serious problem that we're facing.
Yeah, you're basically, anytime you take a medication now, you're rolling the dice on whether or not this actually does what it's supposed to do, or even worse, more nefarious, is this toxic to me?
I just read an email the other day in the Netherlands. There was a public television documentary on this subject that was really well done, very transparent. And they investigated acetaminophen, generic Tylenol, and they call it paracetamol in Europe. And they found that some of those raw materials to make it had carcinogens in them as well. So we really have to get back to the basics and assuring the American people that the medicines that they are taking, they can count on. And I've been recommending to that end that we bring some of this drug manufacturing back home for essential drugs. It's critical for our health security and national security. And, one of the things we learned during this pandemic is there were more than 70 countries that banned exports because they needed these medicines for their own people. So we have to have some self-sufficiency because no one's going to help us out when we need it.
Yeah, and so that is you're now kind of transitioning into the solutions part of this interview. So there is a solution to this, and that solution is to bring back the manufacturing, not just for automobiles or steel or whatever it is into this nation, but part of making America great again is going to be actually manufacturing our own medicine here in our own borders.
That's right. And early on, I drafted just on my home computer a draft executive order that would have the federal government, this was my idea, to have the federal government through the Department of Defense, the VA, the Strategic National Stockpile, to use our taxpayer dollars to incent domestic companies to start making just our essential drugs. We don't have to make everything here, but those things you need when people are sick to run our ICUs and emergency rooms. And that has turned into a draft executive order that the administration has worked on. And it's sort of stuck now. And it's really, the American people will find it very surprising that there are special interests that are actually saying that buying American for these essential drugs will cause more harm than good. It's really shocking.
So what is their justification for that?
Well, I think that there are a couple of factors. There are special interests that really like buying from China. Here's what's going on. You have companies that want to sell their branded products, the higher margin, newer products in China to their 1.3 billion people. And they make a lot of money doing that. Mm-hmm. But in return, China always wants something. If you want access to our market, what are you going to give us?
Right.
And so they're giving up the generics, the commodity products, and letting China make them. China's already making 10% of our generics, and they want to get up to 60, 70%. And they're going to do it if we don't intervene.
Rosemary?
So the American people are being thrown under the bus, and I talk about this on Twitter at Rosemary 100 just the other day, because the American people need to understand what's going on, and they're putting tremendous pressure on not having Buy American for our basic medicines. It's just stunning.
Are you able to name any type of names, such as like big household names like Merck or Pfizer, that are companies that are just blatantly turning a blind eye to this, or is that something that you might not have details on?
I'll just give a shout out to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is what's really troubling. Also, is that they are communicating misleading information. There was an article in Reuters that said, well, nothing to worry about here. We can do 70% of our pharmaceutical manufacturing here in the U.S.
Wow.
And it's simply not true.
So
I know where you're getting that number from, but, it's like ventilators. It's like saying we can make ventilators here. Well, it turns out a lot of the circuit boards were being made in China. Mm-hmm. So it's terribly misleading to the American public and to policymakers. And so I've seen my job as to put the facts out there as best I can. I spent 3 years researching China RX because it was so hidden. And it has like 900 notes in it, so people can see that this is really fact-based. And nobody's really been able to refute it. So I'm hopeful that we can make some progress here and wake up enough people. And I've been contacted by domestic companies that want to start making things, but they need customers. And the federal government would be a great place to start for our veterans, our military, and for our stockpile.
Absolutely. So currently, the John Birch Society actually has this as a action agenda item that we are promoting on our website. So if somebody were to simply go to jbs.org, right on the top, you've got action projects that you can actually click on and get involved in. And one of those is to promote this idea that you've actually you're the author behind this, is to get our medication produced in America.
Yeah, thank you for that. We have to, if you talk to the average person on the street, regardless of political affiliation, most people will say, yeah, absolutely. There was a survey done years ago about, do you trust China making medicines? And like 95% of Americans said no. They remember when their dogs and cats died because of an industrial chemical put in pet food.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah,
And the infant formula scandal. So, and China doesn't care.
No, absolutely not.
And also what people can do is on my Twitter at Rosemary 100, there's a place there where people can right at the top, click on the link and tell the White House that they need to sign the executive order to bring some of our essential drug making back to the United States.
Yeah. So I'm looking at the list right now. So there's a list of bills, and we provide the full links to the text at jbs.org, that have been introduced in recent months that you should urge your representative and senators to support. So you've got House Resolution 4710, Pharmaceutical Independence Long-Term Readiness Reform Act, House Resolution 6049 with companion bill Senate 3343, Medical Supply Chain Security Act, Senate Bill 2723, Mitigating Emergency Drug Shortages Act, and House Resolution 5927, Safe Medicine Act, and last but not least, House Resolution 5982, Safe Medicine Act. Seems redundant on that part, but still, there are a number of House resolutions and Senate bills that you can support if you just get on here and hit the Act Now button and go to your federal legislative agendas, and you can encourage Congress, senators, President Trump to all support this.
I've been heartened that there's been bills introduced by members of Congress on both sides of the aisle. This should be the most bipartisan issue of all time. And I don't know if anything will be done now for the remainder of the year, given it's an election year, but we've got to get moving very quickly. There will be another pandemic. There will be some natural disaster down the road. And our situation isn't getting better. It's going to continue to deteriorate. The FDA is not in those plants doing inspections because of COVID. They've kept their inspectors out of those foreign travel. So we're basically getting unregulated products.
And it's so funny to me because, so many people were watching what we eat. So many people, they've got these apps on their phones where they can scan the bar and you can see the grade of the meal that you're about to consume, what the ingredients are. People are wanting, calories to be put on the menu. So you're hyper aware of what you're putting in your body until it comes to medications. But it's until it comes to the medications, and then you're just popping pills and you don't care what's in it.
Yeah.
I think we've trusted, and for many years you could trust. I have, in writing China RX, I spoke to a lot of people that worked in the industry making products in the 80s and 90s, and you could hear the pride that they took in their work, in their craft, in their science. But as the world frankly became global, and we allowed our manufacturing to leave our country, it's been basically a form of deregulation. And most people don't know where our medicines are being made. So, but right now, when you tell people, there's a ton of interest. And, the quality is also a problem. And a lot of doctors and people taking, generic drugs are saying, gee, this doesn't seem to be working for me. And there's good validity to some of their concerns. There's a group that started testing generics, and more than 10% of what they tested doesn't meet standard.
Wow.
Doesn't dissolve right in the body. And the FDA doesn't do that testing. So we've got to bring that back to assure and give peace of mind to the American people, to patients who are sick, and to doctors and nurses who care for them, and pharmacists.
I have a question for you, Rosemary. We've heard over the years, Caleb and I, that with the topic, I know it's kind of off topic, but it's actually still on topic, with the basic inoculations and then also vaccines. We've heard rumor that the elites have access to cleaner forms of vaccines that don't contain things like mercury and some of the other contaminants, fetal tissue. Do you know of any sources of exotic, basically clean pills that are basically out of us, the middle class, the peasants, the waifs,
serfs.
the serfs that we don't have access to? Is there maybe a market that's hidden that we don't even know about?
Yeah, just on vaccines, I didn't study vaccines. I studied the generics that have been around for years that are 90% of our drugs that are prescribed. But we open up the chapter 1 in China RX with a Johns Hopkins trained physician who walked into a very famous hospital, and he needed to stay overnight. He was generally very healthy guy, but he got contaminated heparin, a blood thinner.
Mhm.
The key material came from China, and it turned out it had lethal contaminants in it. And within 11 minutes of getting a couple doses of that medicine, his heart went into complete heart failure. His other organs began to fail. And the following week, they had to take his heart out and put him on an artificial heart machine.
Wow.
So this affects people from all walks of life, whether rich or poor. No matter if you're a so-called elite or whatever you do in your life, if you walk into an emergency department at a hospital, you're going to get the same medicines as everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah. So, returning kind of back to the article that the New American had put out, which I believe is a pretty fair kind of summary of your book. You talk. We've already talked about making America safe again, and how much we have to bring this medication back. But kind of we've also already talked about what the potential national security implications for this. But then more on the compassionate side of things, this also, for veterans, so many of these veterans who some, gave parts of their body to
Yes.
defend this nation, or even, we're talking about like criminal justice reform, right? The prison system, all of the medications that these prisoners are under, that they're under the government's care in the prison system, are also being given these medications. So it's like you just pointed out, it's across the board. It from the so-called elites all the way down to the lowliest lowly human being out there. They all potentially can suffer from what China is doing with the medications.
That's right. When I testified before Congress, I opened my remarks by saying that these are the medicines taken by you, members of Congress, your staff,
Wow. Yeah.
members of the White House, the Supreme Court, top brass in our military, and sold in big box stores and retail outlets across America. I was contacted by a veteran, and this is a very fine gentleman who served his country for many years. He was in the Twin Towers on 9/11 helping pull people out. So he was exposed to a lot of carcinogens. And he reached out because he got a letter saying his blood pressure medicine that he got through the military retiree health system, that it was contaminated with carcinogens. And that's devastating when people feel as if they're taking a medicine and it turns out it could be harmful to them because of how it was manufactured. And that turned him into an advocate within some of the military nonprofit groups. And that enabled me to get an article in Military Officer magazine and to sort of escalate this and raise awareness. So this is very real for people. It's unfortunate that the media doesn't report these stories. It gets buried, just as drug shortages get buried. And from a compassionate side, there are some generic drugs that are just not made anymore. And there are thousands of children with rare diseases who are dying because of it. This is just in recent years. So it's not as if we need, research for new drugs and new therapies. We have them. We just need people who will make them.
Oh, it's
But
so good.
It's going to take people who really care
Yeah.
to make that investment.
Like you pointed out, this isn't a partisan issue. Whether or not you want to make America great again by bringing production back to the United States, or the compassion side of things is tugging at your liberal heartstrings, whatever it is. This is an issue that needs to be addressed. We've got to get medication made in America again, because it's going to benefit all.
And she said earlier, the kerfuffle, is as she described it, hadn't even started with a trade war. Well, it's beyond a kerfuffle and trade war. It's actually a war. We have a war of propaganda that's going on, and it's very evident that there's something brewing between us and China. This would be like basically Nazi Germany providing medication to the British
Yeah.
pre-World War II.
It's a good point. Yeah. And what it is you already brought up Tylenol, but it can be something as simple as going to the store and taking aspirin, just grabbing aspirin off the shelf, something so benign. You don't even think about it. You wake up in the morning, you got a headache, you pop a couple aspirin. That could potentially be toxic to you if we allow this to continue.
That's right. I was shocked we can't make aspirin anymore because China makes the core ingredient, acetylsalicylic acid. We can't make vitamin C anymore because China cheated and got the global market share for ascorbic acid.
Gosh, and that's, people take vitamin C
huge.
all the time because, just, hey, you take some vitamin C, it's good for you, during flu season, whatever it is. And now this could potentially be toxic for you.
And these supplements are not as well regulated, if they're hardly regulated compared to our prescription drugs. So it's a very serious problem, and we have to fix it. And part of that is by raising awareness about vitamin C. I know there are some groups that are thinking about how we can, call out, big companies that supply vitamin C and say, so where does your product come from?
Mm-hmm.
And we need to do the same thing with our medicines, but most importantly, to bring that manufacturing back home.
Absolutely.
And to have it fully tested, full transparency. It doesn't have to be more expensive. That's so important for many people. We have new technology for how medicines can be made, and we can make them much cheaper, faster, and real-time quality control.
That's good. Yeah. So go to jbs.org, scroll over to Act Now, and then scroll down a little bit, and you can actually contact the president, Congress, to encourage them to support a number of these House bills and Senate bills to bring medicine back to the United States. Rosemary, we've got 45 seconds left. Give us a closing statement, plug your website, whatever you want to do.
Sure. Well, China RX is on Amazon. You can get it on Kindle or hard copy. I want your listeners and viewers to know we donate proceeds to good causes. This book was written in the public interest because it's so important for our country. And please follow me on Twitter at Rosemary100. You'll get updates and opportunities to take action and to make a difference.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much again for joining us on Church and State. We really appreciate the interview.
Well, thank you for having me today.
Absolutely. All right. Church and State is brought to you in part by Covenant Church and Mountain View Vital Medicine. Always remember the tree of liberty is most likely a birch. And with that, Church and State is out.
God bless.
All right.